Well, hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. This is Colette. I see people coming in, so we'll just let them do that. We've got at least 15 minutes, so I'm going to go back on mute. And thanks to everyone for joining us.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well for this Friday.
Yes, thank God it is Friday. We made it.
Oh, I'm so thankful. Yes.
So,
Are you the one hosting this event or?
so I'm part of the BOC, and the BOC is hosting it, but this wonderful, beautiful lady right here, Colette Holt, she is the presenter.
Okay, good. Wonderful.
Yes.
Let me see. I'm
And
going to make sure that Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, no, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna navigate my headphones here because I lost hearing here.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no worries. And I, for some reason,
Okay.
you know, things just start off with issues. Okay.
Hi, everybody. This is Colette.
I think
I am
Hi.
on. Hi, I'm going to mute. When you tell me that you're ready, I will put up the screen.
Awesome. Okay,
And I'm
thank
going to
you,
go back
Colette.
on mute for a bit.
Okay, awesome.
okay.
Oh, this is a little odd. Let's see.
That's what happened. I had my iPhone connected as well.
Yes, you know, I have all these screens and I know I'm going to look crazy because I'm looking at my big screen. So I'm always going to be looking up. So I apologize.
That's okay.
It's going to be awkward. Come on.
So I feel like you have that down. Maybe I seem to be a little bit like, maybe not this but I'm so proud of how our district is adapted. I love my kids, teachers, and then my students I feel have really adapted as well. I'm just really proud of all the effort they put into it. You know, we're in a pandemic, wildfires. In our first week of school, we had earthquakes, wildfires, we had power outages. So it's been an interesting year. It's been challenging. Ava and Lily, are you all taking virtual classes as well? Yeah. I know she actually teaches, do you? Yeah. Okay. Just checking. What do you teach? History, 8th grade. And you could teach all subjects? I did teach history. Just history. What's in the lesson plan this week? Next week? Today they are working on an all men created equal project where we're looking at the Constitution and comparing what's happening in the past identity groups with what's happening. We need more team Stephanies around the country, don't we? How have you been keeping busy as a family? She enjoys writing a lot, and before the shelter in place order, she had already written a book, and she's currently writing a second one. She's writing a book? Yeah. You've written your second book? Yeah. Hold on for a second. What are your books about? My first book is about
So Colette, if you can hear me, I don't have control over anything. So if maybe you can mute the participants.
And how do you come up with the ideas? They just come to me. Amazing. Great to meet you. I'm glad you're doing well, and I think it strikes me when you say we should appreciate every day of blue sky. That's such an important thing to do. Those small things in life, right? Stephanie, Ava, Lily, take care of yourselves. All right. Bye, guys. We'll be right back here online. Closed captioning sponsored in part by Macy's VIP sale is going on now. Where would you love? Anywhere. Get an extra 30% off top fall trends with your coupon or Macy's card. And get 15% off fragrances. Care and makeup. Plus star Fort Clifford burner purchases. They say 20, 30 years. If you look at the federal system, look at possibly reinstating federal parole, have an opportunity to come home. That have enacted, make them retro. Social distancing with my grandparents. Decade have an ability to actually get some heat from these laws that passed to send them home. But then when I look at women specifically, there's some primary caretakers legislation that was passed in California. So a woman having maybe her first time.
I'm sorry, guys. If you can hear me, if you can just mute your microphones.
Or try to make a calzone, right? Calzone, right? Calzone. 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 Now this This is breaking news. Why am I even here? Apparently, I have a beach. Stephen Levine from Irving, Texas says, Ryan, we love your beach on the Panhandle of Florida. I had no idea. There's a Seacrest beach. My parents been holding out on me. And we sell merch. Speaking of which, we sell socks. We do sell socks. I don't know if I've ever seen the socks. Ask them. Do I have live with Kai and Ryan socks? $15. I could use it today, right? It's $15. $15 for both. Yeah. Okay. Wendy T from Baxley, Georgia, for our 24th wedding anniversary. My husband surprised me with a very own live mug and socks to wear while watching. So if you want to know, I have that very same remote control, so I know exactly how that works and how to spin the batteries when I'm back. And let's see, finally from Massachusetts. I want to be a children's book illustrator in the future, so I thought I'd start out drawing my two favorite kids in the morning. It's kind of a low blouse I'm wearing. I like a deep V. Thanks for the honest portrayal. Money in the show.
Right after we both respond out and keep the public safe.
First aid kit.
Quietest auto insurance commercial.
I'm sorry, guys. I don't have control to mute out the noise. If you guys can hear me, can you please press mute?
Houses again. I don't know about you, but I haven't left the house basically since March. But if you're interested in information about ACCA, I put the website into the chat. If you have questions, you can certainly contact me. This is my 20th year as general counsel to the organization, and I've actually been involved with ACCA since 1991. So it's been a huge part of my professional life, and some of the closest friends I have, I've met through ACCA. It's a great group. We are going to be doing some online programming during the next several months, just to keep people abreast of what's going on. And so please do that. It's $100 to join. It's probably the cheapest educational materials you'll ever get. So please do check us out. But thank you for having me. I was delighted to be asked. This is a very important time for civil rights practitioners, and also certainly in California. For those of you that know me from before, I got married last year and moved to San Antonio, Texas, where my husband's family is. So I am no longer in California, but my heart is there. And of course, just breaking about the wildfires, also for our friends in Oregon. It's really quite something. So I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy from all of the possible ways in which people could be hurt right now. If you could all mute your phone or your screen, or however you came in, that would be great. I think the way we're going to handle this is I'm just going to go through the presentation. I'll pause at some breaks, and we can see if there are any questions that can be read, because I really can't see the chat box and see the screen at the same time.
So
yeah,
I cannot see the chat box either. So I am so blind right now. So I guess we'll just go through.
Oh, you know what you can do is you can go to the bottom of Zoom and hit chat. It'll open it as a dialog box, and then you can move it like out of the line of vision. That's what I just did, but I don't know how well that might work for others. I have two monitors, so I can see it over here now. So we'll make it work. I mean, I can pause and go look too.
Okay, I can do that because I think I need to. Are you guys seeing me move all this little wiggly line?
Yeah, we're actually seeing your screen right now.
You're seeing my screen. Okay, so I will figure this out, because as of right now, I have no idea where the Zoom meeting is. So we're just gonna go ahead.
It's behind all these windows, right?
Yeah. So
I have lots of tips for people from working from home, because I have worked from home for 26 years. If you're really going to be doing it, spend $100 or whatever and go get a second monitor. It will make your life so much easier, especially if all you're working off is a laptop, so that you're not constantly flipping back forth from windows. The other thing is never get up and turn the television on in the morning, because then you may never get to work. All right, well, why don't we go to our next slide, which is a list of folks who I believe are members, and you can all see each other there and how to get in touch with one another. So thank you to all of you and anyone who's also a guest. So next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to talk for a while, hopefully not too long, about a couple things. Certainly Proposition 16, which will repeal Proposition 209, and then some additional trends, issues, and whatnot. For those of you that are clients of B2G now, have that system, most about the second half is pretty much what we did last week. So, please do sign off. That's why I put it last, so that if you were on that presentation, you can just, go to lunch because you've seen it already. All right, let's get started. So what is Proposition 16? Many of you may know this already, hopefully you do, but it is the effort to repeal Proposition 209, which was first adopted in California in 1996. So that is literally the wording of Prop 16. Allows diversity as a factor in public employment, education, and contracting decisions. As I'm sure most of you, if not all of you know, Proposition 209 has been interpreted as essentially prohibiting any decision-making by a public agency that considers race, gender, ethnicity in making any type of public sector decision. This Proposition 209 has, to put it, I think, mildly, really dampened and eliminated in many cases the ability of agencies to really have robust race and gender conscious public contracting programs. Of course, it does not cover, Prop 209 does not cover any federal enactments. It specifically exempts those, of course, as it must, because any state constitution is subordinate to the federal constitution and federal law. But it has certainly put a damper on any ability at the local level to do not really much of anything. I think the other thing that I observe, and I say that as a transplant to California, was that it really, in many ways, has led to a sort of remarkably weak minority and women business community. If people can't get work, they can't stay in business, and they certainly won't have extra money to hire lobbyists and interact with government in the way that you really need to in order to be an effective voice. And so it's led to race and gender neutral programs, even in federally assisted programs, which certainly could have DBE goals, but don't. And as I said, I've been very struck by that, that in many instances in California, agencies are not doing even what they could do. And I think Prop 209, which was designed to reduce the ability of government to eradicate systemic racism and sexism in government behavior, really has been, sad to say, extraordinarily effective. Next slide, please. So if you want more information about Prop 16, I really suggest you go to the website for the Equal Justice Society. So that's ejs.org. I'm actually working with them. I've worked with them off and on for 15 years probably, on a guide for local governments in responding to Prop 16. And that's really what I want to talk about next. We don't have it finished yet. We've got chapters. There's one on contracting, one on education, and one on employment. So you can certainly check back at the EJS website for more information. once we get it completed and it's ready to be published, I will put it up on my own website. So you'll also be able to find it there. Next slide, please. So how might policymakers and compliance officers respond, assuming that Proposition 16 passes? And it certainly does look good. I suppose if there were ever a time, this would be it. Although a cautionary note, the state of Washington has a constitutional amendment that's very similar to Prop 209. It's not identical, but it's almost word for word. And there was an attempt last November to repeal that on the ballot statewide, and it failed. So take nothing for granted. And there's a whole campaign, and if you're interested, let me know. I'd certainly be happy to put you in touch with the people that are running that. So there is a lot of activity going on. But let's assume that it passes. What can you do? How might you respond? Certainly one of the most important things will be to educate policymakers about what they can and cannot do. I'm becoming increasingly concerned about this because I'm getting emails and calls that essentially boil down to, oh, once Prop 16 passes, we can immediately have an MWB program, right? Wrong. What the adoption of Prop 16 will do is essentially place California in the same position that the rest of the country has been in since the Croson decision in 1989, that you must in fact engage in fact finding, evidence gathering, and ensure that you have a program that meets constitutional requirements as laid down by the federal courts. Many of you probably know that the federal courts are extremely hostile to these programs. I would say over the years, more have been struck down, though not recently so much because we've got better studies and we know more what to do, than probably have been upheld. And certainly whatever I used to think, I would say that since last Friday, whatever ideas we had that perhaps the Supreme Court might not be as conservative as we fear about these programs, I think we know where this is all headed. It was bad enough when Justice Roberts was my swing vote, but if it doesn't matter which way he swings, it's not going to be good. So it is really critical that people understand that they do have to meet the strict scrutiny guidelines and standards for having any type of race and gender conscious program. And let me note, it doesn't matter what you call it. I get this question a lot. Oh, what's the difference between a DBE program and an MWB program? And the short answer is nothing. You can call it an emerging business program, a business equity program. I don't care. Federal judges are not fooled by what label you put on it. If there is any benefit on the basis of race and gender as a part of the program, you have a race and gender conscious program. So the DBE program for federally assisted transportation contracts is very much a race and gender conscious program. So don't let people get confused about that, because whatever you call it, you're still going to have to meet the same test. So what is that test? Again, many of you may be familiar with this, but just in case, first the agency has to independently establish its compelling interest in remedying discrimination. This is done through disparity studies, and I'm going to talk about those in a minute, because that's really the most important thing to focus on going forward about Prop 16. But you really do have to have a strong basis in evidence that there is a problem and that some type of race and gender conscious remedy is supportable. Any remedy that you do adopt must be narrowly tailored to the evidence that you present. We don't see this as much as we did, so say 15 years ago, but there have been agencies, cities in particular come to mind, who have just basically decided to make it up. We like this goal, we don't like that goal, and they lost, to put it bluntly. So you really do have to make sure that any program that you adopt is in fact tied the result of or embodies the evidence that you presented. So that's really the first thing, is to educate people about what the standards are. I think the second thing is going to be to generate community involvement and enthusiasm. You know, sometimes people can just feel so beaten down that it just seems like one more thing, and you know, why are we going to trust anybody who's going to help us? Then they say they will now, and so people can get very discouraged and really cynical sometimes. So I think getting the word out that there is something that can be done and it is possible to have effective programs is going to be really important to get the resources that you're going to need if you're going to in fact adopt some type of new DBE program. Next slide, please. So I've divided these suggestions up into short, medium, and long term, and I think our Equal Justice Society guide is pretty much going to follow that paradigm as well. So in the short term, the first thing I would do would be to take a look at your current procurement and contracting policies. There is often an awful lot that an agency can do right now that will reduce barriers to MWDBEs. And you see there's some possibilities. There are others. Experience requirements. These can be problematic. Forget whether you have a program or not. If you have to have built 10 of these in order to build the 11th, or you get extra points for already having done work with the agency, those kinds of things are self-imposed barriers to the participation of new and minority and women-owned firms. If you made it up, you can change it. Bonding is a little trickier. There is the State Public Bond Construction Act, but again, you might want to try to be creative about that. Insurance requirements. These can be very burdensome. I mean, do you really need $2 million worth of umbrella coverage for a $100,000 project? I often find that risk management departments just run on autopilot. They slap the same insurance requirements in every contract regardless. Again, that's something the agency creates that's a barrier, so it's something the agency can reduce. Payment turnaround times. This is the very first question I ask any new client. What's your net paid? If you tell me it's more than 45 days, then we don't really need to be talking about a program. We need to be talking about getting people paid. I have been at this for over 30 years now, and I have watched dozens and dozens and dozens of minority firms die because they couldn't get paid by the agency or by the prime. Some of it's just really egregious. So the worst example that I've ever seen was if you've been to Chicago, which is really my home, and you've seen our beautiful Millennium Park downtown. We have the Bean and the pavilion, and it's all lovely. Millennium Park bankrupted the biggest Black contractor and the biggest Black engineering firm in Chicago because the city of Chicago paid so slowly. They just couldn't make it. So really take a look at payment and where are the sticky points in your payment process. Access to information about specific opportunities, and do you have any kind of overall procurement forecast? How easy is it to find information on your websites? Some are better than others. This would be a time to start taking a look at that. And then finally, what kind of outreach are you doing to small and minority and women-owned firms? You know, now that we live in this virtual world, which I frankly expect to continue for quite some time, do you need to do something extra? Do you need to do something different? I've been pleasantly surprised, really, that when we are doing our interviews for disparity studies or outreach events, we're actually getting better participation than we used to because people don't have to go anywhere. You know, you don't have to get a babysitter. You don't have to drive and park and all this stuff. And so this actually could be a good time to be doing that outreach. Second thing I would take a look at is review your current contract data collection protocols. For those of you that have B2G now, you know, go forth. Those of you that don't, this is a moment to take a look at exactly what data you have, how you are collecting it, and even doing things that you have to do anyway, like monitor prompt payment compliance. That's the agency's responsibility to ensure that primes are paying promptly under the prompt payment statutes. And so if you're not doing any kind of monitoring or data collection, query as to how you are in fact meeting that basic requirement, but there are many others. Next slide, please. Medium term. Well, once you've taken a look at your data, start filling it in. What we find is that very few agencies, even those that do have B2G, have truly collected all of the data for all of the firms for all types of contracts. So start filling that in. You're going to need the race and gender of primes and subs, and it's all subs. The biggest missing hole is lack of non-certified sub data. And it makes perfectly good sense because even if you've been running a DBE program, you probably haven't had any need for that. But if you're going to move forward with any type of new program, you are going to need race and gender. You're going to need NAICS codes and work descriptions. It just can't be Colette Holt and Associates. You know, what do we do? What are our proper NAICS codes? Contact information. I'm always sort of surprised at sometimes how thin this can be. There'll just be a name or, you know, an initial and a name, no phone number, no email. How do you get in touch with these people? So make sure that you have all that. And then of course you need all your payment data, including change orders. Often an agency will have award data, but they're not really too sure at the end what totally got paid out. If you don't have some type of electronic system, you really need to get one. Especially now that people are not going to be able to come into an office and look at paper. The ability to manage things electronically through cloud security, I think, is really going to be important. A good system will also save you time and money should you decide to conduct a disparity study, because the great majority of the cost of doing the study is going in and cleaning up all your contract data. So if it's already clean, that's great. And then your last medium-term activity would be to develop a disparity study request for proposals. Next slide, please. So what is long-term? Well, really, it's conduct your study, and if your study supports some type of a new program, get that drafted, and then you're going to need to train your own staff and your vendors on your new program. You know, those are 3 short bullets. They involve actually an awful lot of steps, and it's important that you start planning now if you would like to see any new program or new remedies before 2022, really. I think if people got started in January of 21, you'd be lucky if you got a program going by January of 22. So it really is a longer term project. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about disparity studies for a while here, because I think that's really going to be where your action is going to be. You need to look at all these race neutral things we just discussed, but if you want to be able to have goals that are enforceable and defensible, you're going to have to get a study. So let's talk about a study for a little while. And I'll stop over here. Do we look like we have some questions? This would be a good place to take a pause.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay. So if we take a pause, the only way I'm able to see, I think I might have to.
Oh, you know what? Never mind. I can see him.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you,
no.
because I am blind. With all the 3 monitors I have, one is not displaying correctly. So
No problem. I can actually see them. That's fine. I just have to turn over here and read them.
Okay,
yes,
great.
the presentation will be shared. It'll be on Golden Gate's website. That's absolutely fine. We have a question here. If we are already conducting disparity studies, do we need to do another one to meet the strict scrutiny standard? Let me be clear. That's what your disparity study that you're conducting is supposed to be doing, is in fact meeting strict scrutiny. And it seems here someone is from Caltrans. You have had lots of studies and litigation too, which I'm happy to talk about. Hopefully the disparity study, if you have one underway, is in fact correctly designed to meet strict scrutiny. Now I'm going to go in a little bit into different ways that people can conduct disparity studies, because there really are some pretty important differences in methodology and that lead to very different results, but certainly that's the idea. So somebody's saying definitely take nothing for granted. Oh, this is interesting. I saw an anti-Prop 16 propaganda tailored towards the Hispanic community because it, quote, victimizes the Latinx community. Oh my, well, I'd love to hear more about that. Well, you know, there's, let's just say this seems to be the era of misinformation, misdirection, and just outright lies. This is more personal, but I will tell you, I really am depressed by 9 in the morning, which will be 7 for you because I've already read the New York Times and the Washington Post and I just want to go back to bed. It's a tough time, but we will get through this. I know we will. Somebody says here, when you say contract data such as NAICS codes, do you mean we should be tracking this per contract? Yes, that's exactly what I mean. You need a NAICS code assigned to every firm that works on your projects. That's both primes and any subcontractor, subconsultants. We tend to talk in construction terms, but certainly for those of you that want to run a new local program, that would probably include things like professional services, IT. And so, you know, you want to be sure that you have in fact provided a 6-digit NAICS code for every single firm in your contract database. Let's see, what else do we have here? Oh, okay, somebody wants to hear about disparity study methodology. Well, all right then, let's get to it. So the first thing you have to figure out in doing your disparity study is what was your utilization. By the way, people get this backwards all the time. They say, you know, let's start with, tell us how we're going to do availability. Well, you can't get to availability until you've done utilization, because it's the availability to perform the types of goods and services you purchase in the geographic market in which you operate. And you can't figure out the markets until you've done your utilization analysis. So I think this is sort of a fundamental misunderstanding that people think, oh, you're going to do availability and then tell us how you're going to do utilization. No, wrong, wrong. First is utilization. And what do I mean by that? I mean, determine the utilization of minority and women firms as a percentage of dollars in your geographic marketplace and your product or industry marketplace. We use dollars because dollars is a much better indicator of what's really going on than the number of contracts. You could have minority and women firms getting hundreds of little itty bitty contracts, but it could, for example, amount to no more than maybe 5% of your total spend. So you can ask someone to give you the number of firms, but I don't think it's actually terribly useful, other than it would give you information about whether or not what little minority and women participation you had is all concentrated in tiny dollar value contracts. Although you can figure that out by looking at the total dollars anyway. What I mean by the geographic market is the physical location of where the firms are located. One of the things that got Justice O'Connor's ire up in the Croson decision was the fact that the city of Richmond was accepting minority-owned firms from anywhere in the country. And she says, no, you have to, if you're a local agency, be limited to remedying discrimination in your own marketplace. Now, you know, the Croson case was decided in 1989. I think it was argued in 1987, and I think originally filed in about 1984. Since then, the world is completely different. I mean, look at the fact that we can have this meeting like that. And so I think that the concept of a local geographic market in many ways is extraordinarily outdated. I would love a case where I could directly argue that. However, the last thing I want to do right now is go to federal court and give any of these right-wing judges the opportunity to strike down affirmative action across the country. So we're just going to have to wait for a more auspicious time. But at the moment, the law is that you have to take a look at exactly the geographic boundaries of your marketplace, which is delineated in counties. By product market, I mean, what does the agency buy? You know, you hear all this information in the general media about the economy's doing this or this many businesses are doing that. But the government market is actually pretty specialized. Now, it does vary by what type of agency you are. So obviously a school district is going to have a different product market than, let's say, a sewer agency. But it's not everything. And so you really do have to narrow your utilization analysis to the products that you actually buy. You want to use the highest level of detail that you can, which is really 6-digit NAICS codes, not construction or professional services. These are useless categories when it comes to trying to set goals. And worse, I think, to be blunt, they make people lazy. I see this all the time, that there's a standard goal for construction and people slap it on every single contract. If you get challenged, you are going to lose. That is not a sufficiently narrowly tailored enough approach. What elements go into the construction project? And that really is at the 6-digit level. Now you can do an analysis grouping NAICS codes into these buckets. I frankly don't find it useful, especially because it's somewhat arbitrary. So let me give you an example. What is landscaping? I think most of us would probably think of that as part of a construction project, and therefore, should go in the construction bucket. But the NAICS code is not sector 23, which is construction, it's in the services sector. So these categories strike me as artificial and not terribly helpful, but I mean, you could use them, but you absolutely have to get your utilization at 6 digits. Really suggest you do not set a ceiling. We see this a lot, where somebody just decides that minority firms can't do any work any larger than X dollar amount, 500,000, 720,000, something like that. And therefore they don't look at any contracts that are bigger than that. Well, the problem with that is you can't include what you did not study. And so your law department will probably give you an opinion that if you had a $500,000 ceiling in the study, you have a $500,000 ceiling in your program. The most egregious example of this was New York City, that had a study that only looked at contracts $1 million and under. And the Corporation Council said, that's the limit for the program. So the city of New York for many years had essentially a micro program, because $1 million in New York, will that even get you a good parking space on a Park Avenue apartment? I kind of doubt it. So don't do that. I do think you need to, however, set some floor. Sometimes you see people, they want, $5,000 contract study. Well, why? You're not going to set any goals on those. You're not going to have any subcontracting. And it's expensive to go back and fill all that in, and I don't see what the point is. So really do think about whether you really want to include small purchases. Again, we talked about filling in missing subcontractor data. Do try to obtain a large majority of the contracts and the contract dollars. I would say at least 85%. We do see some studies where when you actually dig in there, they only looked at 20% of the contracts. I do not want to go to federal court with a record that thin. Let me stop and see, are there any more questions? Kind of there. Okay. Should the study include both prime and some sub data? And if so, should there be a separate analysis? You do definitely want to include your prime and sub data. If you don't, then you can't cover prime dollars and sub dollars. So that's an absolute definite yes. Now, in terms of a separate analysis, it sort of depends what you mean. You could certainly determine the utilization of prime on prime contracts versus subcontracts. But I caution people about this, because it may be that in your subcontracting activity, you don't have as egregious disparities, because that's more where there tend to be minority firms. Certainly if you are running a DBE program in California, you will often see no disparities at all in your subcontracting. So if you then say, well, we're not going to include subcontracting, you now have a totally race and gender neutral program. There is no such thing as a prime goal, because the only way you could meet that would be to be a minority or woman firm, which is the functional definition of a quota or a set aside. So I would say be careful about that. I don't like to do it. I don't think it's helpful, but at least understand the implications should you go down that road. Let's see, anybody else? No? Okay, all right, good. Next slide, please, then. That's good. Keep those questions coming. All right, well, that was your utilization. That's who you spent your money with, what you spent it on, and where the firms were located. Now turning to the availability, because in a disparity study, ultimately what you're going to compare is the utilization of women and minority-owned firms versus their availability. So you have to figure out who's available. You also, of course, have to have availability for goal setting. So here are the steps that you really need to take. You've got to get a database of your agency projects, that's your utilization. Identify your markets, that's your utilization. Then you're going to need to count and identify all the businesses that are in the relevant market. And this is an important point. Not just the ones on your vendor list and not just the ones responding to surveys. And I'm going to get to that in just a second. In the end, you want to produce dollar-weighted availability estimates to be able to set your overall annual goals. If you are DBE agencies, these are your triennial goal submissions to your US DOT Modal Administration. But you also want your study to be able to produce detailed estimates that you can use for contract goal setting. Too often, people get these construction level sort of studies back, and then it dawns on them eventually, how are we going to use this to set contract goals? Well, you're not. And to the extent that your contract goal setting is unglued from your disparity study, you make yourselves more and more vulnerable to a legal challenge. Because in fact, a lot of where the litigation has been going over the last several years is not addressing that first element of strict judicial scrutiny, do you have sufficient evidence? But the second requirement, that the program be narrowly tailored. And if you don't use data from your disparity study to set your contract goals, query as to whether or not you'll be able to meet that test. Next slide, please. So we talked about this, don't use your broad categories. I really resist year-by-year analyses. I don't know that they tell you very much, and it's virtually impossible to do it, especially because think about it. Agency awards contract in year 1, makes payments on the same contract in years 2, 3, 4, and 5. I don't know what it tells you to try to do that year by year by year. There's too much variation there. So what I think you want to do is have about a 5-year snapshot. That will also smooth out any anomalous projects that you had. You know, maybe you built the once in a lifetime, new city hall or something. So I think you want to be able to take a broad snapshot, and it's just really difficult, if not impossible, to do it. Agencies aren't going to have the data, and so I just question whether that's something helpful. Next slide, please. Another possible way to do it, and I'm going to make you a strong argument about why not to. I see people do it, but I think it's a mistake. And that is using a bidders list approach. So usually what this means is you will take your certified list and you will divide it over everybody who bid. This doesn't work for several reasons. I mean, certainly one thing is if to the extent that you believe that there's discrimination in your marketplace, that's going to lead to fewer minority firms being on your bidders list. If people don't think they're going to get work, they're not going to bother. If there's anything I can tell you myself as a small business owner, if you spend your time chasing stuff you're not going to get, you won't make it. So, people focus. And if they don't think that your agency is a place where they're going to get prime contracts, why would they go get on your bidders list? You can also have the converse problem, that if you were the only game in town, everybody may flock to get on the bidders list, but that doesn't mean that that's an actual accurate representation of the business population in your market area. So you can have both an over-inclusive and an under-inclusive problem. You've got an apples to oranges problem that people are combining lists. Sometimes they combine vendor lists with bidders lists with certified lists. It's a mess. So how would you justify that? The other thing I think is that it really does not recognize the fact that the way that subcontracting firms or firms that primarily do subcontracting get work is through prime vendors. And so why would they go get on your bidders list? Because that's not how they're going to get work. And then I think the most important point is that if you only look at your current results, you have baked in the discrimination you're trying to fix. So let's say that people don't think they're going to get work from you. And then you look at your bidders list and they're not on there. And you go, oh, okay, I guess we don't have a problem. You have no way to find out whether or not there are firms that would like to do work on your projects, but are not on your list, or to find out why they're not on your list if that's all that you ever look at. Let's see, what do we have? We have a question? Oh, okay. In terms of the geographic diversity in California, does it make sense to set different goals by region? Well, it depends, again, what you mean. Certainly for a large state agency, you could set goals by region, but I don't know what you're going to do with that, because you've got to set contract specific goals, and regional goals are not contract specific. So you can take the geographic unit and narrow it, but it still doesn't obviate the problem of setting narrowly tailored contract goals. And note that at least in the DBE program, US DOT has not approved programs that try to set triennial goals by region. Part 26 is clear. You set an overall goal for what you expect to achieve on your federally assisted project. So if you want to try regional goals, I'm not sure why you necessarily would, but if you do, you are going to have to go and get a waiver, I think, from the Secretary of Transportation. And I actually have some, I think, later slides about waivers. All right, we'll keep rolling here because it's starting to get late. All right, Census Bureau data. We see this a lot, and I appreciate that sometimes this is the best you've got. People use the county business pattern data. They'll take their directory of certified firms and they'll divide it over county business pattern data. I see it all the time. Some serious problems with this. First of all, you can't weight the county business pattern data. You just can't. You can't get it in that format. And secondly, it's very broad. It's all the establishments in the economy, and it really is trying to look at exactly what it says, which is county business patterns. And for a disparity study, you really do need it much more granular than that. I am very much opposed to the survey approach. I see it used, but here are, I think, some real downsides about trying to establish availability with surveys. First of all, they're voluntary, which means you get very low response rates. And whatever we used to be able to do with surveys, I think with all the hacking and phishing, I don't respond to surveys unless I know exactly who it came from, because it's just too easy to get your information hacked. The other problem with it is it may in fact exclude firms that are actually working for the agency. So the city of Portland, Oregon got into this rather embarrassing position about a decade ago, where they got a study back and said that they didn't need to take any real race neutral measures. So they should still stick with the all race neutral, gender neutral program. The Minority Contractors Association went nuts, demanded to get the availability backup data, and discovered that because they had used a survey, that several of their members were not counted as available, including the biggest Black contractor in Oregon, who was actually working for the city at the time. I guess he just never sent the survey back, so he got dropped. So this is really problematic. Again, it fails to figure out why people might not send your survey back. And I just don't think it's broad enough to meet the legal standards. Next slide, please. Oh, and here we go. Let's see. Oh, Bendu, how nice to hear from you. I haven't seen you in a long time. We have a question here. Do we have a list of sample questions that we should be asking? Huh, now that's a really good question. Not exactly. I could probably produce something. I've been working on this guide, so maybe I think thank you to whoever that is. I think that's a good suggestion. And we have some slides later that kind of are in that format, but not directly. So I will think about how I can fit that into what we're doing and find the time to do it. But I think that's a really good suggestion. Capacity analysis. Again, there are different philosophies about this, and I want to be candid with you about it. There are studies that do capacity analysis. I am, again, really opposed to it because I think it ignores essentially structural racism, which will obviously impact people's capacities. If you think about it, in a perfectly, in a bad sense, discriminatory world, minority contractors would have no capacity because they never would have been allowed to form. If they somehow did form a business, they would never survive. Would we say somehow that we didn't have a problem there? I don't think so. And so I think this capacity concept ignores the way in which historical structural racism impacts people's ability to be successful in business. A couple other problems. Ignores the elasticity of supply, especially in construction. Firms ramp up, they ramp down. I mean, how much capacity does any given firm have to do a particular contract at a particular point in time? So that's a constantly moving target. We have no ability to figure that out for subcontractors at all because we don't have any kind of information about them. So how would we know what their capacities are? Importantly, when we have tried to control for those variables that people look at, revenue, years in business, we find that disparities persist. And again, this is really the result of a discriminatory system. So if you look at that from that angle, I think you see why you don't want to do that. I saw an RFP recently that was, oh, well, never mind. I've got a slide on that because I was just so startled by it. So I'll save that. And lastly, when we have put up qualified economists, the courts have rejected the need for a capacity analysis. So don't let anybody tell you that you have to do that because I don't think it's true. Next slide, please. Oh, okay, so somebody says here, so what do we use? How do we incorporate the effects of discrimination? I think you really do it through your anecdotal data collection. And so that's a good question, and I will get to that. Since the minority firms are asking about this and we are looking for our study to incorporate their concerns. Yeah, Caltrans, we maybe should have a side conversation about the situation there and, and the studies that you've gotten that have, suggested dropping groups, based on these kind of capacity analysis. So I'm happy to, whoever that is, have a little chat with you at some point. You will have to do disparity testing. You're going to need to compare how tight the fit is between the utilization of minority and women firms by your agency and their availability, however you defined it. It is absolutely necessary, but I want to talk about what happens if you don't find disparity, if you have been in fact been running the DBE program. I don't think that's the end of the analysis. I think you have to take into account the effect of the existing program and the continuing impact of discrimination. So speaking about Caltrans, which got a study some years back that, for example, suggested that there was no need to set goals that included goal credit for Hispanic male-owned firms. Because of the availability analysis, they didn't find sufficient disparities. And so they were eliminated from goal credit. Always want to be really clear, they were not eliminated from the program. They were eliminated for credit towards meeting contract goals. Same thing happened in Washington State DOT much more recently, and there it was white women. Well, what you see is that when you don't include people for goal credit, they don't get any work. There's a big surprise. I mean, people seem to be confusing cause and effect here. The fact that people are doing reasonably well in the program does not mean discrimination has magically, poof, disappeared. What it means is that you're running a good program. And so I do not take the results of the program to be indicative of what's happening in the overall market. And unfortunately, these experiments in dropping people for goal credit have had ruinous consequences for the firms that are no longer eligible to be counted towards goals, particularly white women in Washington State. We saw their participation disappear overnight. And so now, of course, there are disparities, but this is sort of akin to, does the patient need life support? Well, I don't know, let's unplug him and see if she died. Well, oh, she died, I guess she did. These are people's lives that are at stake here. And I think we all need to take what we do very, very seriously because it matters. It really does matter what you do. Next slide, please. All right, so that is your basic analysis of your own data. So I want to add just a little bit about an economy-wide analysis that you might want to do. We like this because it is a way to look outside of your own activity. This is sometimes erroneously called a private sector analysis. And the reason I say it's erroneous is because the Census Bureau also does include government dollars. So it is not purely private sector. It's a general economy-wide. Two basic databases for that. The Census Bureau Survey of Business Owners, they just recently changed the name. It's the exact same survey. And it gives you information about firm receipts. And you can also look at the American Community Survey, which looks at business formation rates and earnings. And this can be a really important element for the existing DBE program in California, because it can explain to a court what would happen if you suddenly went to an all-race neutral program. And the argument, which has been accepted in some courts, is that your own activity would look just like the rest of the economy if you were not applying the affirmative action remedy of your program. That is a remedial intervention in the market failure of discrimination. Next slide, please. All right, so that's your quantitative data. Let's turn to qualitative or anecdotal data. You do need to include it in your study. Understand it is necessary, but it is not sufficient. If all you have is anecdotal data and you get challenged, you're going to lose. The courts require us to have statistical information that discrimination remains a problem. Actually, honestly, every time I say that, I just, what can I do? Shrug my shoulders. Or as a much older African-American friend of mine said to me, are you kidding me? We got to go and get data to know that there's racism in America, to which I'm like, yeah, I know. But it's the world we live in, and it certainly doesn't look to me like it's going to get any more civil rights friendly. The last number I saw was that the administration had appointed over 200 federal judges. There's always this obsession with the Supreme Court, but only a tiny fraction of cases get there. There's a whole lot of action in the appellate and the trial courts, and I don't see that that is particularly friendly to civil rights at this point. You do want to explore biases, exclusion, perceptions of competency. How do people find out about work? Do prime contractors that use firms to meet goals even solicit them in the absence of goals? And it's also the way for you to evaluate what you're doing, especially because those of you who've been running entirely race-neutral programs, this is one way to find out how well that's working. It is also a critical way for the program beneficiaries to participate. I sometimes think we talk a lot about minority and women firms, but we often don't talk to them enough and ask them what would really help your business. Next slide, please. I think you also want to take a look at your current procurement policies. We talked about this a little bit. Interview your MWDBEs, primes, agency staff. It's a way to take a look at what you're doing, how effective it is. You certainly do want some small business elements, probably in any program, race neutral or no. These are size standards and personal net worth. You can do set-asides on contract goals in California. Some states like Texas, you cannot. Just on the basis of size, but you can in California. Also take a look at your supportive services efforts and your business development programs. Remember, the study is not an objective. The study is just a tool to help you get somewhere. And where you're, I think, trying to get is to get more work to these firms to make sure you're running a fair and non-discriminatory system. And to help these people to grow and create jobs and economic opportunity. That's the objective. Everything else is just a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. Next slide, please. So here's some data requirements, and somebody asked about that a little bit. So I guess this might be your checklist of questions. We talked about review your data. They're your minimum requirements: contract description, contract identification number. You need prime payment data, and you need some information on where the primes are located. That's the bare minimum that you need to be able to provide to any consultant. Doesn't matter who it is. Next slide, please. So here's information that's great if you have it. If not, the consultant will have to go and get it, but that is the consultant's responsibility. Never let anybody tell you that you don't have enough information to conduct a study. I recently saw that some paper somebody wrote for the District of Columbia, of all places, that said, well, you don't have enough data to do a study. Well, that's ridiculous. You have to go get it, but as long as you know who you paid, and if you don't know who you paid, you have a whole other set of audit problems that I can't help you with. And as long as you know to whom you wrote checks and for how much and when, you have the basic data to get you started. So you see there some of the additional information you might want. Next slide, please. Now, let's turn to results for a second. What if you don't show large and statistically significant disparities? You probably will for your locally funded or contracts that have not had DBE goals, but you might not, and you might not in the DBE program. So I think there's some things you need to do to ensure that you dig deeper. Have there been a couple of large contracts that were awarded to a particular group? Have there been a large number of awards or large dollar awards to a very small number of firms? What we see when we see like really high utilization, I'm like, something's up here. So we always go and we take a look, and invariably what we find is it's one or two firms have managed to break through and have gotten a pretty significant number of dollars. I do not take from that the fact that a study we recently did, for example, for Harris County, which is Houston, we saw this high utilization for Hispanics. And I'm like, I know it's Texas, but it's Texas. So why would that be the case? Well, as it turned out, there were like two firms that had gotten some pretty big dollars. But I do not take from that therefore it's all good for Latino firms in Houston. What I take from that is there's kind of the Jackie Robinson, I guess, am I dating myself again, phenomenon, that there's one person that breaks through, but that doesn't tell me anything about everybody else. So don't just stop if you don't find large disparities. Dig deeper, find out exactly what firms and what contracts and what codes are driving that, because that's the other thing that we see is that the minority firms, to the extent that they are getting work, will be concentrated in a relatively small number of industry codes. We saw, for example, on some state DOT studies where like all of the landscaping had gone to DBEs, but none of the heavy highway dollars. I do not consider that a success. We want to be sure that the minority women firms have the same opportunities across a broad sector of industries to do work. What about utilization on no goals contracts if you have some? Anecdotal data, ask people, do you get work outside the program? Do the same contractors that use you on goals jobs use you on non-goals jobs? What about other agencies' utilization? With a caveat about that, it can be very difficult to get anything that I would feel comfortable was accurate about other agencies' utilization. What people put up on their website is often, more of put it this way, can lead to more questions than answers. What did they count? What did they exclude? What time frame? So that can be difficult, but if you can get it, it can be useful. And then, as we talked about before, disparities in the overall economy are important. Next slide, please. Do we have any? Oh, it looks like we have some questions here. Okay. Okay, somebody said, did you say we can do set-asides on contracts in California, federal contracts? Can you explain that further? Sure. You can do race and gender neutral set-asides. They have to be truly race and gender neutral. I just talked to an agency that said, oh, we have an SBE program. And I said, well, what do you count? DBEs and MWBs. That's not a race neutral small business program. White males have to be able to participate on exactly the same basis as women and racial and ethnic minorities in order for it to truly be a race and gender neutral program. Some states don't permit that kind of brick on competition at all, so it doesn't matter. But in California, my understanding is that you can, in fact, if it's truly race and gender neutral, that you could have a set aside. Cannot do it on federal contracts, period, unless the authorizing legislation allows that. So for example, there are the 8A set asides, people may be familiar with that, but otherwise no. So be careful about set asides, and people throw that term around all the time, when what they really mean are goals. So if you're talking to someone who's not a compliance professional, like the people who are here today, just probe a little bit with them when they say set asides, what they mean. Because they may mean set asides, in which case you're going to have to tell them, no, you cannot have MWDBE set asides, or they may really be talking about goals. So, nomenclature is important. Let's see, what else? It looks like we have another one. Some of the hardest things to get set up as a small business are accounting and tax, FAR requirements, bookkeepers, prevailing wage. The agencies do not offer classes on this stuff. It's a huge problem. Yes, it is absolutely a huge problem. And the most effective programs will either have good supportive services, technical assistance, or they will be able to steer people to where they can get that type of help. I hear a lot of complaints from prime contractors, and I've interviewed well over 1,000 people in the last couple of years, that say, well, we don't mind doing work with minority and small firms. We were happy to do that, but their back office is lacking. They don't know how to do the certified payrolls. The accounting's all messed up. Did they pay their payroll taxes? If it's a unionized environment, are they in good standing with the union? Safety compliance, all those kinds of things that are hard for small firms. So that's a really important piece of the program. And over the years, I've come to think is at least as important as the goals. Because if we're not giving people any help to grow and succeed, then who cares about the goals? You can have goals all day long. But if there's nobody who's able to meet them and use the program to grow, then we really have not been effective. Let's see. Oh, and then we have 2 more messages. Okay, this is great. People are paying attention. With Zoom, you can't tell. People just they put their picture up or whatever, and they've gone off, and which is fine, and it will be recorded, so you can always listen at your leisure. Agencies and primes do not steer you in any direction. I have been through 3 accountants so far, and I have asked my large firms and agencies over and over for help. Yeah, I mean, the firms themselves are not going to help you. And quite frankly, if you're certified, you need to be very careful about getting help from your primes, because we want to maintain your independence, and you don't want to undermine your certification status by them giving you too much help. And I have a whole different conversation in which we can go into at the end if people like, about how much help is too much help. And that's a very tricky thing, but just be concerned about that. And so, no, SCORE probably isn't going to do that there. And if you're construction, they're not construction focused anyway. I'm not really sure where you could go get help. If you are certified DBE, I know Caltrans has some excellent supportive services that are available, so you might try there. But it is definitely a hole that is lacking. Missouri Department of Transportation had a great program. I don't know if they're still doing it, but they had a roster of construction accountants and construction lawyers who had agreed to work with their certified firms for reduced fee. It wasn't free, but the agency was subsidizing the cost of that. I've always thought that that was a great idea, that it really gave people real world help. So I don't know if anybody in California is doing that, but those of you who are at agencies, it's something I really would urge you to think about.
Hi, Colette, can I just buzz in real quick?
Yeah, please.
And sorry, I can't see anybody, but I do want to throw in there, and I'll put the information in the chat box, but NorCal PTAC does offer supportive services for Northern California, and they're free. And I do believe like they can help with, other things than just certification. And then I know they do bid matching. There might be some really useful help from NorCal PTAC, Procurement Technical Assistance Center. That you might want to just, whoever asked that question, you might want to follow up and see if they can offer any assistance. But also, that's what the BOC is for. So what you need, let us know, and we can coordinate. You need, banking or a financial, advice or any technical assistance, that's what we are here for. And there's 26 agencies that are part of this group. So definitely get in contact with me, and we can coordinate some type of other outreach event that would actually help you, and hands-on, some real help, true help.
Fair to me.
So
It's Rachel Kish. You may have guessed because I ask these types of financial questions at every Cal Mentor meeting. This, as I've said before, should not be the hardest part of starting a small firm, and it has been. I had someone who claimed to be an IRS auditor come in and set up my books because I'm an engineer. I'm a little risk averse. I do professional. I know the consequences for not getting this stuff right, and I absolutely did not want to not have it right. I bought all the big insurance. I paid the big bucks for it. I didn't ask for the exception. I just bit the bullet and went into debt the first several months for agencies that were
wow.
so, but I was fortunate. I had the resources to be able to do that. But this, setting up the books, setting up the back end, being able to get this stuff right was hard. The person who claimed to be an IRS auditor and set up my QuickBooks, that training on how to put what stuff, what's allocable, what's unallowable, the independent cost rate overhead, there is how to do, if you're a construction contractor, how to do prevailing wages. I had a 4-hour show with my Cal Mentor mentee with their controller, who should leave sainthood as far as I'm concerned, my mentor firm, who is reviewing my books because I've been through 3 accountants. One of them fired herself. She says, this bar compliant bookkeeping books scare me every time. So I went out on bark.com and I said, look, I need someone who understands FAR stuff, because I don't. I'm not an accountant. I don't like this stuff. I know I have to get it right. And I don't bother contacting me if you don't know what this stuff is. If these acronyms, if you don't know what ICR, audited overhead rate, is, don't bother. Next year, I lose my safe harbor rate. I shouldn't. I have 4 in my firm. But I will have had a public agency contract for 3 years, so I'm going to go over my $1 million, and Caltrans says I can't keep it. I don't have an office. I've always had a home office. I always plan to, but I'm going to lose my my overhead. I'm going to have a really low overhead, and I'm going to get hammered for it. So I apologize. I did not mean to just.
No, you're making some excellent points. I'm a little shocked that the safe harbor rate for Caltrans, is it $1 million?
Yep, that is the agreement. And I asked this question on Cal Mentor. I got a response back. They would have to change their agreement with the FHWA. So of course they're not going to do that. They might increase the safe harbor rate next year, but too bad for me. I succeeded. I got a prime contract with a local agency, but I've had it for 3 years. So I'm out. I can't increase my overhead because everybody's working from home. So I did well. So good job, Rachel. You're screwed.
Right. No, this is, so hopefully people know what we're talking about, because Rachel,
there's no class that will teach you. I'm sorry if you don't, because there's no class that will teach you.
No, I know. And this is a really sore spot for me, for you all. The whole way engineers get paid, the audited overhead rates, the whole thing strikes me as crazy. All you're doing is penalizing people for keeping their expenses down. Why is it my business what your profit is? I mean,
but that's not what this one is about. So I apologize.
Okay. Well, maybe we can talk about it sometime. Well, and I'm very interested in what, if anything, we can figure out to ease the burden on these, on these small firms.
So maybe this is a next time.
Okay. All right. Now, so Miss Davenport has a topic for her next one.
I do. And Rachel, I have your contact information. So you and I next week we'll get together and we will do something.
This is David DeLuz with Caltrans. If you can reach out to me as well, because these are exactly the kinds of concerns that I'm really worried about. My job is to try to help get folks to success, and that doesn't sound like success if you're being penalized. Now, I've been on my job less than a month.
Oh, okay.
So I'm still trying to figure out where everything is, but I do know who to talk to, and I really want to make sure that we have an environment where we're not penalizing folks for being successful. And understanding things like this is exactly the kind of stuff that we're providing the right kind of technical assistance. I know that we provide supportive services, but we need to expand our financial services in terms of helping people put their books together. So maybe we need to work with the BOC. Maybe we need to work more directly with NorCal PTAC or PTAC and try to make sure that we're identifying the right kind of services that folks need.
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, one of the things that disturbs me is that like I say, mostly those of us on the government side, or those of us that work with governments, we talk about DBEs, but I don't think we talk with them enough and
that was
find
your
out
comment.
what
Yeah,
their issues are.
that was your comment that initiated my,
yeah,
my putting
hello.
that in
It's
the
like
thread.
we think we're helping, but maybe we aren't. And
No,
actually,
you absolutely are. But it's if once you got, I've got my certification. Now what? And
exactly.
the classes that I took to, how to start a business and legal things to start your business. Okay, those got me off in a generally right direction. And 15 years experience, so I was petrified about the whole bookkeeping stuff. And I
Yeah, you should be.
I am. And so, but as soon as I started, I asked all of those resources and was unable. You know how reserved I am, because obviously it's kind of clear. And David, welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I
WA
think for your
agreement
next
in your
one,
first month on the job.
yeah, really. Whoa, talk about into the fire. So maybe for your next one, that might be something. And I have some suggestions about some people, really not me, because I hear these problems. I don't know what to do about them. But for example, Washington State DOT, I know, has tried to be creative about the safe harbor rate. So maybe, I can put you in touch with someone there who could maybe be on your panel or something to talk about these things. The other thing I see that people need is they need legal help. People sign contracts all the time. I don't represent firms really anymore. I mean, some of the really huge ones, but when I was a younger lawyer, people would call me and they go, can they make me do this? And I'd say, well, send me the contract. And the short answer was, yes, they can. Well, I didn't understand that. Well, okay, but you signed it. So, I mean, there's all of the things that I think are really important to keep people safe in that sense. And here's where a good mentor protege program really might be useful too. If there's somebody that can sit down with you and show you how they do it, and really give you some assistance. All right, well, I'm done with disparity studies for a minute. At least I think. Agencies need to do joint ventures between prime. Yeah, well, let me make a couple observations about joint ventures. And as they say, there be dragons. Couple things. One, your solicitation has to be out on the street long enough for people to form the joint venture. It is a separate legal entity. If all they have is 2 or 3 weeks, you can't get it done that fast. Now, if you have pre-existing joint venture agreements that can be easily modified for a particular project, that's great. Most small firms are not anywhere close to being able to do that and do that level of planning. So that's sort of the first thing about JVs. The second thing about JVs is you got to make sure that a minority or woman partner is in fact carrying their share of the load. We saw this more on the airport concession side. Huge number of scandals about essentially fraudulent JVs. So if you're looking for JV information, if you go to the civil rights page for US DOT, there is guidance there. You will see there's a separate section of information on joint ventures on FAA contracts, but the principles apply regardless of whether you're in the airport environment or some other industry. So just be careful about that because I have seen people go to jail behind fraudulent JVs. So just tread carefully there, I would say. So let's talk about some disparity study mistakes, and because I know we got it's getting late here, and we got a bunch of other things I want to try to cover. But you all have the presentation, so you can review it as you see fit. We talked about small number of contract dollars analyzed. One that amazes me is sometimes studies don't bother to talk to the non-MWBEs. This strikes me as fatal in litigation because you're not going to be able to assure the court that the problems that minorities identified aren't the same as non-minorities might have had because you didn't ask them. The pandemic, I'm not too sure what to say about that, about surveys, except I suspect that you're going to get even lower rates. Sometimes you see disparity studies insist on including workforce. They have nothing to do with each other from a research standpoint. Now, of course, it is true that almost everybody starts out as an employee before they own a business, but don't do that. it just confuses the issues. And to be frank about it, I have never seen a workforce disparity study I thought was remotely useful. People go to the census, they get these super broad categories of laborer, let's say, and skilled trade. Well, okay, but if I'm a contractor trying to meet a workforce goal, that's useless. There is no skilled trades. There's masonry, carpentry, plumbing. They're trades, but it's not all one big lump. And again, especially for many of you, like in Oakland, my former home, San Francisco, these are highly unionized environments. And so the fact that even if you could figure out what those numbers are supposed to be, we all know that union contractors are going to hire union labor, full stop. So you've got to take all that into account. So I just think these studies are useless, but if you want one, just please don't stick it in a disparity study. Irrelevant or unnecessary RFP elements, outlines and extra reports. We talked about small purchases. Just when I think I've seen everything, I recently saw an RFP that demanded criminal background checks. Really? I mean, okay, but they're not cheap. They're intrusive. And why are you asking yourself that? I think that's really the mindset. Ask yourself for everything you ask for, why? What are we going to do with this information? And what is it relevant to? I've seen some that require local counsel. Disparity studies are not designed to meet state or local laws. They're designed to address the 14th Amendment equal protection requirements. You'll need local counsel later, but don't lard up your study team and increase your costs by adding lawyers. And of course, we don't come cheap. So you're just paying for something that you're not going to need. Recently saw one that asked for not one, but 2 statisticians. Hey, why not 3? Let a consultant determine for themselves what they need, and then you can evaluate whether what they proposed is adequate or you think is the best value for the project. But don't tell people how many staff people they have to have, because quite frankly, you don't know. You don't know how they got their work organized, so it's just not useful. Data validation, this is one of my favorites. I'm not sure what people mean by this. I'm going to assume that the data that you have about who you paid are accurate, because it's not an audit. Important point, disparity study is not an audit. So what is that supposed to mean? I've seen now sometimes people want a separate analysis of certified and non-certified firms. Okay, but again, what are you going to do with that? Next slide, please. Impact of change orders. You might want to study that on a few of your own contracts, but this is not relevant to a disparity study because change orders are fact specific and they are agency driven. So I'm not sure what it is people are looking for. One of my new favorites is include in the final report what you didn't include. So discuss what information you didn't include. I have no idea why somebody would do that, especially because all you would be doing is giving a roadmap to plaintiff's counsel in a deposition. So we can spend half a day talking about the stuff that you didn't include. What is the point of that? Bidding success rates. Again, this is so specific that you really can't necessarily tell anything from that. And again, it's only for primes. You have absolutely no way to figure that out about anybody who submitted a subcontractor quote. We've talked about the subcontractor versus prime. We've talked about the broad categories. Impossible requirements. What I was just going through are unnecessary, expensive, but could be done requirements. Now this is when it gets to be impossible. Verification of anecdotal data. This cannot be done. If somebody comes to an interview and says, I was sexually harassed on a job site and here's what happened, you have absolutely no way to quote unquote verify that. Disparity study research do not have subpoena power. We cannot compel anyone to testify about anything or produce any documents. So how could this possibly be done? I have the suspicion, and maybe it's just because I'm old and cynical, but I have the suspicion that this is kind of a, those minorities are lying when they talk about discrimination, that there is no such thing as real racism. It's just maybe some individual sometime, but we have to verify that. Because nobody talks about verifying prime contractors when they say they don't discriminate. So, but it's not, you can't do it. Business creation analysis, this is my favorite right now, which Said we want you to look at marital status, number of children in the home, spouse's income. Well, first of all, where on earth would you get that? Secondly, what's it relevant to at all? And third, lurking in things like marital status, number of children in the home, are discriminatory variables. So for example, the marital rate for Blacks is lower than whites. Do we really want to look at that as some kind of relevant factor in a disparity study? Have we now just built in, you know, what, 400 years worth of attacks on the Black family unit? I mean, what are we doing here? So this one really threw me, both because you can't do it. Why would you do it? And if you do it, are you importing discriminatory biases immediately into what you're trying to fix? Determination of other agencies' markets. If you didn't do their disparity study, you cannot do that. And then comparing the growth of minorities to non-minorities at the local level. But there's really no data sources for that. The Census Bureau I talked about before has information, but it is not at the local level. So I just don't know of any databases that would give you that. And I'm not sure what you would do with that. If non-minority firms are growing faster than minority firms, well, okay. But unless we could figure out why that was, and the why is not discriminatory, then I don't really know what this is designed to do. But in any event, I don't think you can do it at all. Next slide, please. So what do you need to do? Pay attention to the questions you get asked. If 5 or 6 different consultants ask you essentially the same question, it means it wasn't clear. Sometimes agencies will just say, refer you back to the section you were asking a question about. Well, that's no help. Obviously, if people understood it, they wouldn't be asking. So do really pay attention. There's a lot of information really in what questions people ask you, and that's generally true. Describe your contract data in detail. We've gone over that, I think, in more than enough depth. Keep it simple. These are the only 4 questions you need to ask. Who are you? What are you going to do? How long will it take? And how much will it cost? You got a 30-page RFP, and in the end, that's all that's in there. Don't need some long exegesis about Croson and Adoran and all this other stuff. And often the procurement people will want to lard these up with everything. And you can do that, but you're not getting any value for it. So it really is a very simple set of questions. The answers are not simple, but the questions are simple. Next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to stop on that. All right. No, it doesn't look like we have any more questions, so that's okay. So I'm going to spend just a little bit of time on some cases, just because I can. And I think that these are important. Again, if you were at the B2G training we did last week, go have lunch, you've seen this, but for those of you that have not, there's some important cases that have come out lately, and this is one of them. This was an African-American owned media company that sued Comcast. And a unanimous Supreme Court held that the plaintiffs must show that racial discrimination was the but-for cause of the decision. This is under Section 1981 of the Civil Rights Statutes. You may be more familiar with Section 1983, which covers state and local governments. That's what people sue for, police brutality or discrimination or whatever. But 1981 governs private activity. And we had tried to argue that so long as race was a factor in decision-making, that was enough. But all 9 justices said that no, that Section 1983 requires that race be the only reason a decision was made. So this case has been remanded back to the 9th Circuit, which covers California. I would suggest to you that this has basically rendered this provision useless. It would be very difficult to prove that race is the only factor. People by and large are not stupid enough to write down something like, we refuse to ever do business with Black people. And these are business cases, usually, contract disputes, those kinds of things. So I think that if this is the test, essentially 1981 is dead. You just will never be able to meet that, but we'll see. Next slide, please. This is one you may have heard about as well. This is where a group of Asian American students have sued Harvard. alleging that it intentionally discriminates against them. This is a Title VI case for any of you who are the Title VI officers. And the court ruled that Harvard does not intentionally discriminate against Asian Americans, rejected the arguments that race was the predominant factor, that Harvard was using racial balancing, and that it had not first exhausted race-neutral alternatives. So note the imposition of the same strict scrutiny framework that we see in the contracting arena in the educational arena, which is why I think it's important for contracting people to know about this case. Next slide, please. So the court did uphold Harvard's program. The plaintiffs didn't present any individual applicant who had been denied admission who otherwise would have been admitted had they not been Asian American. So this is an important point from a litigation standpoint. The program is not formulaic. It uses a kind of a whole person approach that looks at lots of things. And if any of you have had children applying to college in the last few years, I am told, I have not, but I am told that they ask for all kinds of things now. So they're trying to get a more three-dimensional picture of who the applicant was. So what can you take from this? Again, strict scrutiny does apply. High quality statistical support from qualified experts is what really won the day in this case. It really wasn't anecdotal. And certainly the attacks on affirmative action continue. So stay tuned. The Justice Department has entered the case on behalf of the plaintiffs, so against Harvard. So we'll see what happens there. Next slide, please. The weed cases. You know, California has had, of course, medical marijuana for many years, but the rest of the country has taken a while to catch up. So the state of Ohio recently passed legislation to make medical marijuana legal. And they wanted 15% of the licenses to be issued to economically disadvantaged groups, which they defined as Blacks, Native Americans, Hispanics, and Asians. Two applicants who did not meet those requirements sued and won. The court said strict scrutiny applies, and you can see there, you know, why. There's no history, no race neutral measures, no relationship between 15% and anything. And it was a very heavy burden on applicants because it was really a fixed set aside. So appeals are pending. We'll see what happens. Now, the state of Illinois has recently legalized recreational marijuana and was a little more circumspect and didn't define the license requirements or the license advantage as one of race, but of socioeconomic disadvantage. And you know, had you been incarcerated on a drug offense, those kinds of things. Interestingly, when the licenses came out a couple weeks ago, the vast majority of them went to pretty large investment groups that had some disadvantaged folks, kind of maybe. So a lawsuit's been filed, but this time it's been filed by those who were considered to be socially and economically disadvantaged, excuse me. So stay tuned. Next slide, please. Now, this is another case you may have heard about recently, and this was the LGBT case, where the court held that Title VII, which is the prohibition on employment discrimination, does in fact include sexual orientation and gender identity. In contrast to the 1981 case, here, if sex is any one reason, that's enough. It doesn't have to be the sole or but-for cause of the employment action. In a really rather elegant opinion by Justice Gorsuch, the court, the majority holds anyway, that homosexuality and transgender status are bound up with sex and the plain meaning of sex. Court rejected the idea that, of course, in 1964, no one was thinking about sexual orientation, let alone transgender individuals. The court said that doesn't matter, that everybody understands what sex means. And whether that was anticipated is simply not relevant, that the plain language of the statute covers this type of discrimination. Next slide, please. But there are some warning signs in this opinion. I know everyone was very excited. It sure beats losing, but Justice Gorsuch in the majority opinion doesn't even use the term gay. Instead, he insists on homosexual. And I do think there's some information in there. At least as concerning, he states that Title VII protects individual employees, not groups. So my question is, what does this mean for class action Title VII cases? Does this mean that, at least in the majority's opinion, that you cannot bring such cases? Now, you should know that over the last decade or so, the court has made bringing class actions extraordinarily difficult anyway. So I'm not sure that this actually much matters on the ground, but it certainly does from a theoretical standpoint. Very importantly, for those of us in the MWDBE world, does this mean the disparate impact theory is no longer going to be an approach that the court will permit? Disparate impact theory is all about patterns. It's all about groups. A disparity study is a disparate impact study in many ways. So what does this really mean going forward? It certainly does give me some pause. And then there are the dissents. Justice Alito says the court is making policy. Justice Kavanaugh basically agrees that all of this should be left to Congress. You know, we won on this one, but I don't have a good feeling about this case, to be honest. Next slide, please. Okay. Trying to complete something completely different. Let me stop there. See if anyone, nope, nobody's got questions about cases, at least not so far. Okay. US DOT DBE COVID guidance. If you are running a DBE program, this is for you. It has been extended to the end of the year, and you can see there some of the changes. If you're doing certifications, essentially, this all boils down to, you can do it all virtually. On-site visits, interstate certifications. Now, it does extend the time period for when you have to respond to an interstate certification application if you can't get a virtual meeting. And then the application period where you have to respond is told, so it's just put on hold. If you're going to decertify someone, you have to maintain a complete record, you have to record it, and you have to be able to produce it later. Just taking notes is not going to be sufficient. You can summarily suspend a firm by email. It used to be you had to send it certified mail and all this other stuff, but not at least until the end of the year. Next slide, please. Same thing with appeals, extends the time. In terms of program requirements, you can do your overall DBE public participant goal, overall DBE goal, methodology submission through public participation that is virtual. They're usually due August 1. You got an extension till November 30th. You can do commercial useful function reviews virtually, and pretty much everything else can be done electronically. And how long this will last, I don't know. We'll see. Next slide, please. Again, certification, email's okay. You have an, extensions now to 90 days to respond and make decisions. The annual no change affidavits have now been extended to 60 days as well. Notarization, you can do it online if you can do it under state law, or you can sign the presence of a witness. I am on a personal crusade to get rid of notarization, period. Notarization is a holdover from the days when people were illiterate, because you remember, what is a notary attesting to? Not the truth contained in the document, not that the document is true or accurate, but simply that you are the person that signed it. Well, you need that if people are just making an X, because how do we know whose X it is? At this point, why are we doing this? And I think notarization has gone up to 35 or 40 bucks a signature in California. So if you have a lot of these to do, this can be kind of pricey for a small firm. So I don't know why we are doing this. I would love to see it just eliminated altogether. Next slide, please. Okay, we've got some new guidance, as in new as in the beginning of this month. DOT said that DBE and ACDBE certification should be limited to firms that intend to perform on DOT contracts or concession contracts, and you can recommend that a firm not pursue certification. The problem with this is that many local agencies rely on DBE certifications. They certainly don't want to take it on for themselves. It's seen as the gold standard. And so it is certainly possible that there may be firms that want to be DBE certified because they'd like to work on, City of Oakland contracts, for example, maybe, but really don't have any intention to do work for Caltrans. So I don't know how useful this will be. And then I just sort of questioned, was there some hue and cry throughout the land that there were all these firms getting certified who were never going to work on DOT contracts? Maybe, I hadn't heard that, but maybe other people know more about where this came from, because I'm sort of puzzled about the genesis of this. Next slide, please. DBE program reauthorization. This is important if you do DBE programs. We had the hearing the day before yesterday. If you want a transcript, I can get it for you. I'm going to do a little summary of the evidence that was presented, and I'll put it up on my website. I'm not going to get to it probably till the beginning of next week. That I was very happy to work very closely with the committee on this. I provided testimony. We got lots of letters. They are still seeking letters of support, so you could certainly write to Matt. He would love to hear from you. It reauthorizes the DBE program, and the only thing it really changes is it eliminates the absolute size cap that was below the SBA limit. The decision was made that under the present political circumstances, that we could get this through the Senate and we could get Trump to sign it. That this was, again, not the moment to be trying to make any major changes to the DBE program that would expand civil rights. So that is what Representative Clyburn decided to do, and the Speaker, and that is where we stand today. But it should be going to the Senate in a couple weeks. Next slide, please. The OMB memo on training. Presumably people saw this, where I just have to quote it. I couldn't, there's no way to summarize this. It has come to the president's attention, and this is through press reports, which they do not name, but it appears that the president was watching Tucker Carlson's show, and he started railing about anti-American propaganda and how tax dollars are being wasted on critical race theory training, and and I've actually watched it now. It's really quite a show. And so we get this memo, and it's come to the president's attention through press reports that executive branch agencies have spent millions of taxpayer dollars to date training government workers to believe divisive anti-American propaganda. The divisive, false, and demeaning propaganda of the critical race theory movement is contrary to all we stand for as Americans and should have no place in the federal government. Next slide, please. So federal agencies must immediately cease and desist such training. Identify training related to critical race theory white privilege, or that suggests the US or any race is inherently racist and evil. That's why I have all these quotes in here, because how could I make this up? That all such contracts are to be canceled. Now, I would make you the argument that this is essentially meaningless. Nobody is doing any federal training that's calling people evil and inherently racist. This is such a caricature, and if you watch the Carlson segment, it has nothing to do with the world as we all understand it about diversity and inclusion training, nothing. And so this probably doesn't mean anything. It's kind of more of a political stunt, but people should be aware of it if they were not. Next slide, please. So where are we going? Well, who knows, honestly. So what do we know? We know that local budgets are declining. We know that small minority and women-owned firms are especially vulnerable. We know that overall in the economy, Black firms are failing at twice the rate of white firms. Now that's general throughout the economy. I haven't seen that yet in the government sector. I suspect it's this time next year when we're really going to feel the pain, because anybody who's working right now is working off of money that was appropriated pre-coronavirus. It's the new budgets that are going to be a problem. We don't know whether this will be true throughout the government sector, but I will tell you, and those of you who heard this last week, I have this rule of two, a rule of thumb, that if it's bad, Black people will have twice as much of it. And if it's good, we'll have half as much of it. So for example, the Black unemployment rate is twice that of the white unemployment rate. And so whatever is happening to overall firms in the government sector, I expect will be twice as bad for Black firms going forward. And here's where things like good supportive services, making sure you're doing what you can to get people paid, all that's going to be really critical because people are really going to need your help. So what don't we know? Well, how long this will last, how much assistance we're going to get at the state and local level from the federal government. Right now, the Senate seems to be incredibly resistant to trying to do anything to help state and local governments, but that might change in the new year. And we don't know how spending patterns will change. Maybe we won't need as many government workers in offices. Maybe we won't need to be building as much stuff. Certainly if you're in a transit agency rather, this is a very difficult time. I mean, I'm hearing from transit agency clients that their fares were down 95% for 3 or 4 months, and they have nowhere close to bounce back. If you are at an airport, you know, who knows? So I just think it's going to be very difficult to know how people's behaviors are going to change. Next slide, please. All right. So finally, never let a good crisis go to waste. In the immortal words of Rahm Emanuel, my former mayor, you may get increased competition as other sectors dry up. We've talked about examining your current policies and practices. I would particularly view emergency purchases with skepticism. Somehow the minority and women firms are never on the list for the emergency purchases. So when people are telling you how they have to do it right this minute, I would at least ask some questions about that. And last but not least, I think this is the moment for us all to reaffirm our commitment to these programs, to helping these firms to grow and to survive in these difficult times. And I think that is maybe my last slide. It should be. I thought I'd leave about 15 minutes. Dangers, of course, Colette, that would be what you would end with. Are DBE programs politically expendable in hard times? I'm afraid that the very first department that's going to get cut is going to be the diversity department. If you're going to have lower availability, you need to be sure that you just don't assume that only the minority firms have lower availability, because that won't be true. So if you're going to reduce your numerator, reduce your denominator. I am concerned about intra-group conflicts as times get tighter and pressure for race-specific goals. I'm already seeing that. And then last but not least, I guess, what kind of a focus do we really want to have? Are we trying to remedy structural racism and entrenched sexism? Or is more of the focus on diversity and inclusion, which is really not sort of backward looking and is kind of ahistorical? We want to just get more people in the mix. Or are we really trying to fix the current effects of past discrimination? And I'm pretty sure that is my last slide. So any more questions? No? All right, well, I can't see if anybody's moving that raised their hands, but it looks like, yes, doesn't look like we have any more. People are probably hungry. It is lunchtime. So
thank you so much, Colette. I finally can see everybody. So yes, thank you. That was so much good information. I'm so glad we have the recording because I'm gonna have to go back and listen and take more notes. But thank you so much.
Yeah, and I'll get you I saw 2 typos. So I will send you a new one. In I was a proofreader in college, and so anything just makes my skin crawl. So I will fix those too and send them to you. But thank you, everybody. And if you'd really like to get in touch with me, I'll tell you what. I will put my email address in the chat box. There, you'll also find it in the presentation, but I'll put it in here. And would love to hear from you. It may take me a little while to get back to you. We are crazy busy, but I absolutely will. Do check out information on the Equal Justice Society's website about Prop 16 and all the really, really great work that those folks are doing. So I thank you, everybody. Have a good weekend, for whatever weekends mean anymore. I don't know, every day is the same around here. But I appreciate your time and your attention. And thank you very much for the work that you do. It can be very lonely to be in civil rights. So this is an organization where you can network with your peers. And sometimes you just want to call somebody and go, girl, let me tell you what they said to me today. And everybody needs that. So thank you all so much. And I enjoyed it. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Colette,
Bye.
again. Thank you. Just real quick, I did put the link to the Business Outreach Committee brochure. So if you wanted to grab that and put in your URL and save for later, or excuse me, or click it, click the link. But yes, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a great weekend, everyone. Welcome, David Deleuze. Thank you, Rachel. You've prompted our next outreach event. So thank you.
If I sign off, I'm going to cut all you off because I was the host. So.
Oh yes. Okay.
Right. Exactly.
We got to go. Okay.
All right. Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye.
Bye.